This judge had no right to do that. They're meddling in foreign affairs. They're meddling in our government.
Attorney General Pam Bondi there, reacting to an escalating back and forth between Donald Trump's White House and the judicial branch. This week on the Crossroads Suncast, local legal experts respond to the current crisis and what it means for the future rule of law. We'll start with some context. On Saturday, President Donald Trump invoked the Alien Enemies Act to deport suspected members of a Venezuelan gang. That wartime law has been used 3 times in U.S. history, most recently in 1941 to initiate the Japanese internment during World War II. It allows the president to bypass due process for migrants who are categorized as threats. The American Civil Liberties Union sued, saying the deportees are misidentified as gang members. Washington-based U.S. District Judge James Boasberg issued a temporary restraining order. Boasberg says, the Alien Enemies Act doesn't apply in the case of those migrants. Even if they are gang-affiliated, cartel-related crimes don't count as acts of war. One of Trump's first actions in his second term was designating drug cartels as terrorist groups. He says cartel gang members are, quote, conducting irregular warfare and undertaking hostile actions against the United States. So here's how it breaks down. On Saturday, Boasberg orders the Trump administration not to move forward with the deportation flight. Part of that order telling them to bring back any planes already in the air. The planes did not turn back, instead landing in El Salvador, where those deportees are currently being held. The Trump administration initially claimed those planes were already over international waters when the written order came down. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt pointing to a potential legal loophole.
Well, there's actually questions about whether a verbal order carries the same weight as a legal order as a written order.
White House Deputy Chief of Staff Stephen Miller says Boasberg's decision to block the deportations was an overreach.
The actions of the Departments of Justice, Homeland Security, and Defense were not in conflict with the judge's order. But at the same time, it is also true that the judge's order was patently unlawful. Beyond unlawful, it was an outrageous assault on the Constitution.
Others in the administration, including border czar Tom Homan, defending the move for reasons of practicality.
We removed tariffs. That should be a celebration.
Monday, Boasberg demanded answers about the timeline of those flights. The Trump administration asked for extensions, pushing back the response time. On Tuesday, President Trump called for Boasberg to be impeached, prompting Supreme Court Chief Justice John Roberts to issue a rare rebuke. Roberts writes, quote, "For more than 2 centuries, it has been established that impeachment is not an appropriate response to a disagreement concerning a judicial decision. The normal appellate review process exists for that purpose." For his part, Boasberg summarized the attitude of the Justice Department as, quote, "We don't care, we'll do what we want." The DOJ accused him of digressive micromanagement. Trump called Boasberg a, quote, "radical left lunatic." All of it seeming to set up a showdown between 2 branches of government, and what many legal experts are calling a constitutional crisis. Journalist and WPSD Local 6 anchor Jennifer Horbelt sat down with Mark Bryant of the Bryant Law Firm, a former Commonwealth attorney from McCracken County, and Tim Kaltenbach, a retired McCracken County Circuit Court judge and former prosecutor, who explained what makes a constitutional crisis.
Seems like it could be one of 3 different things. Either some branch of government refuses to act or at all to do its job. That would be a constitutional crisis. An area where the Constitution is completely silent, that could be a constitutional crisis. But the one that is in the news right now would be the third one, and that is when you would have when a court issues an order, and after the court issues an order and the appeals are exhausted, one branch of government refuses to accept or to carry out or comply with the court's order. That would be a constitutional crisis as well.
So it's fair to say we may be in one.
Yes.
And in fact, let's take a little history here,
Yeah.
Jennifer. Um, when the Constitution was set up, it was set up for three branches of government, each one of them co-equal. The first branch would be the legislative branch, which would be the United States Congress, which consists of the House of Representatives and the United States Senate. The second would be the executive branch, which is the President of the United States. And the third is the court system, the judicial system. And each one of these are supposed to be co-equal. And it's been said for years, if any one of them becomes more powerful than the others, that's how tyranny will begin. And I remember reading years ago Henry VI, the Shakespearean play, and in there's a quote that people say all the time, and it's a quote by a guy named Dick the Butcher. And Dick the Butcher, what everybody likes to quote is, the first thing let's do is kill all the lawyers. But what it really says is this: if tyranny is to prevail, the first thing let's do is kill all the lawyers. And that is what's so scary about this whole thing, because the system is set up where the Supreme Court is not just advisory. They're not telling you, we think you ought to do this. You're supposed to concur when they make a decision. And what happened last Saturday or last Friday when the president was, when the Justice Department was told to stop the planes from going to Venezuela? When that happened and they came up with all kinds of excuses for not being able to do it, they basically ignored a court. And
Oh, and not just, you mentioned Supreme Court, but it's not just the Supreme Court.
this
This
is
is
a
a
district court judge in Washington, D.C. And I mean, those guys are all powerful. Lawyers quake in front of United States district court judges. But these guys are not quaking because they know that nothing's going to happen to them if they don't do it. Because when Andrew Jackson, the President of the United States, ages ago, when John Marshall was the Chief Justice of the United States, he made a decision for the Supreme Court, and Andrew Jackson said, he's made that decision, now let him enforce it. Because the president, he's got an army. The courts don't have an army. They've got United States Marshals if you hold somebody in contempt, but the president has, he's got the power to pardon people that defy the law. And so this is a bad, bad situation for America, for democracy in America, what's going on right now.
Tim, the rule of law, you were a prosecutor, you were a Commonwealth attorney for many years, you were a judge for many years. How important is it that those judges are listened to and respected and are not looked at in a political light?
Well, it is critical for the functioning of the government. In other words, our system is that when a judge rules and appeals are exhausted, then that's the final word. And so if you don't abide by a court order, then you really do have a what is not a democracy. You really would have what is ruled by one man, and that's not consistent with the history of the country or the Constitution.
We've seen the phrase constitutional crisis used before. The Nixon Watergate scandals, one of them.
But he resigned, Jim.
But he resigned. That was what I was going to bring up, is that he toed the line. He did some of what we're seeing today, which is, I'm not going to listen. I'm the president. If you're the president and you do it, it's not illegal. But at the end of the day, he did abide by the courts. He resigned. He stepped down. But we're not necessarily seeing.
Well, he had a little more shame. He didn't want to be impeached. And other people get impeached, and it doesn't seem to bother them. So, Nixon did, but it was not a constitutional crisis. It was a political matter. And he did resign rather than face impeachment.
Do you think they've overused the term constitutional crisis? Do you think that people are maybe a little desensitized to what's happening now because they've heard this before and it hasn't happened and they're not paying attention? I don't know. Tim, do you think that's possible?
I think it's certainly possible. I think that it certainly sells media to say we are in a crisis. So I think that it has been overused on occasion, and I think that it can be used as a means of drawing attention to a news story. Yes, I think it can. I think it can, and sometimes is overused.
Looking at the situation, I know you kind of described the type of constitutional crisis that this might be. We've seen some other examples where that term has been used. We've kind of come to the conclusion that we are in a constitutional crisis right now. If the president continues, if the executive branch continues to defy the courts, um, what are we? What are we looking at next? What would be the? I guess what would be clear to people that this is a constitutional crisis?
Well, it's interesting, Jennifer, from a legal point of view. I mean, whenever I was in Judge Kaltenbach's court and he told me something, I did it. It didn't have to be in writing. Then, the law says that all these orders have to be in writing. But when a judge tells you something, that's the law. And so the Justice Department, in this particular instance, said, "Well, you said it, but you didn't have it in writing yet." Well, that's a totally disrespectful to the courts. And so I think the problem that we're going to find is that the more this happens, for example, John Roberts, the Chief Judge of the United Justice of the United States, he said the other day that we can't just call for impeachment against every judge that does something you don't like. And yet, one of the congressmen in Washington, he said, "Well, that guy needs to be impeached." And then the president comes on and talks in that fashion. And finally, John Roberts just came out and said, "We can't be doing that." And, and in our system, not everybody's going to agree on every single thing. So we've got to get in a situation where when the courts order, like they have for the last 200 some odd years, that you got to do it. And I mean, that's the real concern that all of us lawyers have right now.
Well, you were a judge, Tim. When you hear this rhetoric, when you hear these things that are being said, what's going through your mind as a judge, having sat on that bench, having made these decisions that I'm sure never pleased everyone?
No, I mean, half the people, when you make a decision, half of the people involved don't like what you have decided. And so that's the nature of a dispute. So when you do rule, and unless there's an appeal filed of your ruling, then you expect it to be carried out. And the punishment for not following a judge's order is contempt of court. So you hold a contempt hearing and then decide whether there's a willful violation of a court order, and if so, then you impose sanctions. And so there are certainly statements that have been made recently that we're not going to follow that system, that the courts don't have jurisdiction of this issue. And so regardless of what a court rules, then we are not going to abide by it because we just don't think that the courts have jurisdiction over that issue. And of course, that type of contention has been made oftentimes in the past, that courts do not have jurisdiction. That is, in foreign affairs and other matters. But when that contention is made, that is also an issue to be litigated. In other words, you litigate and you make that contention to the trial court, and then if you don't like the ruling of the trial court, you appeal the jurisdiction of the trial court to the appellate courts, and then once the appellate courts finally rule, that's it. What you cannot do is say we are not going to follow the rulings of the court, because until in the end, the system which we've had is that the jurisdiction of the court is also a decision that is to be decided by the courts. And when that final decision is made, then you've got to follow it. If you don't follow it, that's a constitutional crisis. That would certainly be a constitutional crisis when court ruled that we do have jurisdiction of this issue and you've got to follow it. And then there's a decision and say, well, we just don't believe you've got jurisdiction. That is a would be a major upheaval of the law and the way that the Constitution has been interpreted for the last several hundred years.
Do you think we're moving there? Do you think we're moving in that direction?
I think that there have been statements made. You read constantly, or not constantly, but you've read many statements that have been made in the news by people in the executive branch that we don't believe this is a matter for the courts to decide, and therefore we're not going to follow the rulings of the court because this is a matter of foreign affairs, or this is a matter of that the courts just don't have authority to make this decision. And again, whether they do or don't have authority is a issue that is to be litigated. And then the court, you can make that argument in the courts, but when they finally decide it, that is, a trial court order becomes final, that's it.
At the end of the day, it has to go through the judicial system. It's not one person, a president, Congress, that makes that decision. It's the judicial system.
Exactly. You put your finger right on it. You couldn't say it. I can't say it any better. When the judicial system says we've got jurisdiction, this is a matter that we've got jurisdiction on, and there is a direction or an order of the court. You've got to follow it, and if you don't follow it, that's our system. I think that other countries have other systems, perhaps, where it doesn't work that way, but it's always worked that way in this country, with a few exceptions. I mean, I think that there's maybe Andrew Jackson at one time said he wasn't, as Marcus said, wasn't going to follow the direction of the court. I think Abraham Lincoln, at the beginning of the Civil War, suspended the writ of habeas corpus. But other than that, it has been the history of this country that the courts are the final arbiters of the law, and they make those decisions, and everyone has to live with them. That's the system that our country has.
And Jennifer, there's another thing too that's really frightening about this whole situation. For all these years, I mean, very few people really know who the judges are. But now, if a judge makes a decision that they don't like in Washington, D.C., a congressman will say something about how he needs to be impeached. They'll put his picture up, and it'll be all over some particular news network. And we've got 6,000 people that were in Washington, D.C. on June, no, however many it was, 3,000, whatever, a lot of people, Washington, D.C. on January the 6th, and they've all been pardoned. And a lot of those people, they don't mind going into the Capitol building. Why would they mind doing something to a judge? Why else would they be wanting to intimidate judges to make a decision? And this has never happened in all of modern history in the United States.
Well, I was going to say, you're seeing this, Tim, as a former judge. I mean, did you ever work in a climate like this where it seemed so that judges were being targeted, were being named, were being accused of being partisan for decisions that they made? Is that something that you've seen happen a lot like it is today?
Well, I've had a few people, and I know Mark is familiar with them, that have posted stuff online about about a decision. But what you really don't have is, you don't have another branch of the government and officials in the other branch of the government then attacking a decision of a court, and then advocating the impeachment of a judge. And so let me just say this: the courts have been politicized for probably the last 30 or 40 years. It began with shortly after I began practicing, and that is that in the appointment process, I think, and what I've seen, judges have been appointed, and by the president. And I think that it certainly appears that when they do get appointed, the president knows very well how they are likely to rule on the major issues of the day, so that before they make that appointment, they I think that they are pretty darn sure they know how they're going to rule, and if a matter is brought to their attention. And I think that's different than certainly when I first began practicing law, where the idea was we're going to appoint the best legal minds to this issue and let them fairly decide it.
And I assume that sends a message to the public.
Yeah, and so anyway, so the idea then is that based on who is sitting in those positions, lawyers do now and have for many years tried to forum shop, and that is they try to file their cases where they know that where a judge is likely to rule in a particular way. So the forum shopping has been going on for a long time. This is one step further than that, whereby somebody has gone to a judge we don't like, so now let's remove the judge. And so this is another step down the line of the way law's been practiced, which is that the appointment process has become highly political. In my judgment, people write law journal articles and that type of thing to hint how they would rule if they do get appointed then they get appointed, and then judges and then parties forum shop where they're going to file their cases where they think they're going to get a favorable ruling. And now the next step along that line is, well, we don't like it, so we'll just remove the judge. And that certainly is one more step down the line.
Have you seen this erosion over your career as well?
Jennifer, I'm telling you, until recent years, they wouldn't come out and say, well, he was a Kennedy appointee or he was a Nixon appointee. And now it's all over. And this is,
Report that.
yeah. And now it's like, because he might have been appointed by Barack Obama,
Yeah.
that he's got to be a left wing. Heck, I've been in court in front of some of Obama's appointees, and they're big corporate lawyers that work for Jones Day, and you can't ever get as a plaintiff. You feel like you can't get a fair shake. But boy, if they've decided something that it's not liked in Washington today, they're Obama appointees. And I mean, it really is. It really is disgusting the way I see this stuff going, because a rule of law is so important to our democracy, to capitalism, because without being able to rely on the law, what do you rely on? The whims of somebody that's in the White House?
So I was going to say, it feels like the bedrock of our country really is the rule of law. It's that process of working through the system.
My daddy fought in World War II for our democracy, and I guarantee you he is rolling over in his grave right now. He got called back for the Berlin crisis and the Cuban Missile Crisis, and Albert Jones did the same thing, and yet right now, apparently, it's just everybody just sits back and says, well, that's okay. There's a new sheriff in town, and it's not okay.
Well, and that's why I use the word erosion, because these things don't just happen overnight. I feel like it's usually over a period of time. You mentioned when you started your career, Tim, that you started to see Supreme Court appointments be more politicized. Has this become normal over time? Have we just been desensitized to the courts being declared as being political?
Well, let me just tell you, I really think that Fox News has done an awful lot of that, because they have said for the last many years how corrupt the judicial system is. It's just like anything else. There are people that are corrupt in every different professions. There are people that are incompetent. But where we are right now, though, Jennifer, where we've got law, okay, when you go in front of Washington, D.C., you go before the Supreme Court, you got to know what you're talking about.
Mhm.
There are certain lawyers that do nothing but argue cases before the United States Supreme Court. As a result of that, if the government's got good lawyers that can do it, the other side's got to be able to have good lawyers to do it so the courts can understand a case. Well, what's happening now in Washington, they have signed, the president has signed various declarations saying, we can't have this law firm, they can't have security clearances any longer. They can't go into a federal courthouse any longer because They have represented bad people, and as a result of that, we can't trust them with security of the United States. So that's taken out so many of the big law firms. The law firms, for example, that represented Bill Clinton in the impeachment, the law firms that represented Jack Smith in Trump's indictments. They're all telling them, you can't come in the courthouse anymore. You can't access information because you're not, because of security issues. Well, that is so bad that the American Bar Association now has come out with their own response to all this, and they're sending it around to bar associations all over the country who are coming back and saying this is ruining the rule of law in America, and we've been a shining beacon for the whole world for centuries. And so anyhow, the Bar Association has gotten involved. The American Bar Association has. Bar associations all over the country are getting more and more involved in it. In fact, it'd be good for you to go and ask the president of McCracken County Bar Association, what are you guys going to do about this? Because we've all got to get in line. Otherwise, there, a quote that I really have liked over the years. It says, all that is necessary for the triumph of the forces of evil in this world is for enough good people to do nothing. And so you can sit back and do nothing, or you can care about America. And I can tell you, I mean, I've voted Republicans for president. I voted Democrats for president. I love our country. I just want it back where it was. And I don't know when it's going to happen or if it'll ever happen, but it's very troubling.
Was going to say, there's a corollary of what's going on right now, Jennifer, and I won't get into it too much, but it would be just a huge change in the law, and that is the president is now advocating what's called I think, the unitary executive theory, which is this: after or during the New Deal, all kinds of administrative agencies and other administrative law judges and administrative agencies were set up under the executive branch of the government. And so these have operated independent somewhat of the President of the United States. And that's the way, and the idea is we want them political, but not that political. And so there's now, and so the New Deal especially set up all these agencies like the Federal Reserve, like the National Labor Relations Board, other federal agencies. And so now and that for the last 100 years of having independence from the president has been upheld by the courts. Now the contention is that needs to be reversed, and that these independent agencies now need to act according to what the president of the United States does, or what he orders, rather than what they think is right. That would be a major change in the law. And so you would have something like, for example, the Federal Reserve System sets interest rates. Well, if you were getting ready to have a presidential election and the president thought that we were in a recession and the way to get out of the recession is to lower interest rates, but the Federal Reserve thought we need to keep interest rates very high because we've got terrible inflation. Right now, the president can't call the head of the Federal Reserve up and say, we need to lower interest rates. But if the courts adopt this unitary executive theory, then that could very well happen, which would just again be just a major change in the law. That issue is now being litigated, and so that's something to look at, because these executive branch agencies have operated with independently for the last 100 years, and if all of a sudden they can be ordered by the president to be removed, we don't like what you just did, we don't agree with what you just did, so I'm removing you from office. that would be that could happen, and that would just be just a huge change in the law.
So I want to go back to this law firm thing that you mentioned. The president taking away the security clearances, basically preventing these law firms that specialize in understanding how government works, so they can go up against government lawyers. Um, we talked Tim about how the system is set up to be litigated, so that things get decided by a judge in the end, by the judicial process. Is that something that could be solved by the judicial process, or is that, you know, not something that could be
Well,
solved?
there is litigation, on it right now
Okay.
from some of these law firms, but it is really it's caused it's working because there are a lot of law firms that are scared to death to do anything because they'll lose their clearance, they'll lose lots of clients. It requires security clearance.
Maybe targeted,
Sure.
their name
And
out there.
so yes, but it is working. I mean, the mere fact that these people are being threatened, that there are executive actions that are being taken, saying you can't have it because you're a danger to America. And I mean, that's why the Bar Association is so, it's just so up in arms over this too.
I was gonna say the ADA, they don't typically speak out about things like this in the political realm, right? They tend to remain neutral.
Yeah, they do, and because it's like everybody else, we follow whatever the law is, and lawyers, they don't always like what the decision is in a case, but we have learned to live with it, and so the ABA, they are up in arms over this because it's causing such a stir in the legal profession, and like I was talking about, Dick the Butcher. Yeah, let's kill all the lawyers. I mean, a lot of people don't like lawyers. I get that, but I've also noticed that just pretty much everybody likes their own lawyer. But the truth is that we can't operate without laws. And kings, that's why they left England all those years ago, because the king would just do whatever he wanted to do. We don't have a king in America. We've got three branches of government that are co-equal. But we've got a Congress that right now I think there are three Republicans more than there are Democrats, and so we got a Congress that is Republican. They're not going to do anything about it. We've got a United States Senate that's Republican. They're not going to do anything about it. So all that's left is the court system, and they are inundated because I mean there's so much litigation going on. And so it just remains to be seen. And everybody's got their hand out because, I mean, everybody needs money to file these litigation because, you can't do it for free. I mean, people don't have the time. They've got families to raise and put feet on the table. Yes, they are big cases.
Takes time.
And I was reading one recently, a guy named Mark Elias is a lawyer that represented Hillary Clinton. His law firm, they've signed the document saying, his former law firm, you can't get involved in those cases because of security reasons. And he knows they're coming after him. He represented the Democratic Party and won 60 cases in the last election where they found that the election was not stolen from Trump. And now this Elias guy, he's under threat. He's frightened for his life, for his wife, and for his children. And that's not the America that we all know and love.
Just kind of add up something to what Mark said. This system really depends on people acting in good faith. And if people do not act in good faith, then and the parties don't act in good faith, the branches of government, then the system simply doesn't work correctly. Because to get an issue litigated, it's not something you walk in one day and say, "Hey, judge, what do you think of this?" I mean, it is a lengthy, expensive process, and to get a ruling out of the court, it's designed for that. And then once a court rules, that has to be the law that's carried out in good faith. You cannot say, "Well, you didn't specifically say this, you didn't specifically say that, so now we're gonna challenge." And to be honest with you, President Biden did some of that too. He did it with regard to student loans. Well, they can't stop me. And so it's been done by both sides. But if the parties don't act in good faith, the system simply it does not work properly because litigation, it tends to be very long and very expensive.
When we're looking at what's happening, and we're wondering how, because you said the judicial system has got to be the ones. They've got to be the ones to stand up here, and they've got to be the ones to, at the end of the day, make these decisions. But I assume the people need to support each branch of government, including the judicial system. What is the part of the public? What is the part of media? All of us in maintaining what we currently have in terms of the form of government. I'll let you start, Mark.
Well, Jennifer, I think it is hugely important for people to just start paying more attention because when you don't know what's going on in the country and you don't care enough, and then you go out and vote just because somebody maybe they're going to cut your taxes, or maybe on day one they're going to reduce the price of groceries in America. Anybody that says that kind of stuff, you got to be leery of it. But we're all learning now, but it's too late. And so, I mean, really, people have got to start paying more attention if they're going to vote. And as a result of that, I just think it's enormously important for the future of America that people listen to, read. You don't have to just watch news people on television. Read the major newspapers and see what you can find out about that. Because to me, if we're going to keep America like it always has been and make it a great place to live for us and for our children and our grandchildren, we've got to make intelligent decisions, and we can't just do it based upon a whim or somebody coming in and promising the world to you and people going along with that.
Tim, what about you? How do you feel? What do you feel the role is of the public, media, those of us that aren't in the legal profession, and the role of those in the legal profession? Because it probably is tough for a lot of folks who are used to neutrality as far as the rule of law and not talking in political terms. And when you talk about it today, everybody thinks it's politics. How do you talk about this in an intelligent way? How do you stand up and say something without it appearing political?
Well, you can't call a judge up and talk about an ongoing case with the judge, but you can certainly talk to your congressman or your senator and voice your opinion to in public polling as to what you think the role of the president and the legislature in the courts should be. And I can tell you that there is constant polling, and I can tell you that the people who are running the government pay attention to those polls. So if you are informed and you express yourself, and one of the issues is there are three branches of government, and it is designed that the legislative branch is active, and you certainly can talk to your legislators, your congressmen, and your senators, and you can express your opinion. And then the news media simply covering what is going on and explaining the history of of our Constitution and the way our system works. And if something is out of line with the way the Constitution and the has been interpreted in the past, explain it and explain the importance why this is the way things have operated, similar to the Federal Reserve, whereby on that example where you would have the president calling and say, I want interest rates decreased today. But the Federal Reserve has set interest rates high, for example, so I can get reelected, where the Federal Reserve has set interest rates high to stop inflation. I mean, that's a great example of what could happen if you don't have independent branches of government working properly.
We wanted to end this episode by reflecting on our role as citizens when the system of checks and balances is in question. Here's what John Shaw with Southern Illinois University's Paul Simon Public Policy Institute told us last month.
So I do think that, normal people, regular people, have an obligation when they see things unfolding that are troubling to them to take the time to write, senator, people in Congress, and write op-eds in newspapers and so forth. I mean, to just be engaged in this fight. I mean, the stakes right now are very, very high. I'm not urging people to spend 12 hours a day hovering in front of their TV sets, but they should keep informed and should make it a point to just figure out each day what is happening and what events are unfolding that might affect their future and their children's future.
Thanks so much for listening. If you're enjoying Season 1 of the Crossroads Suncast, like, subscribe, follow, or leave a review wherever you listen.